coming. Excited about this project today. So we have some visiting students from a local high school. I don't know, I haven't talked to you, so I don't know if you're going into engineering or BME or whatever, but if you are going into engineering, you can expect to be doing this in about 4 years, right? Doesn't really matter what field you go into. You have a capstone design project, and so these are our BME students for this year. First semester, normally it's like a proposal thing, but most of them actually have some data at this point, so really it's more of an update on the project, future directions. Presentations themselves, we have 5 projects. They'll go for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have at least 5 minutes for questions. So especially best practices students, please ask plenty of questions so I don't have to. But I guess that's about all I've got to say. So go ahead and get started with our first read.
Good afternoon, I'm Evan.
I'm Alexis.
So before we start anything, I want to ask you guys all a question. By a show of hands, how many of you have ever experienced or know of anyone that has an ACL, has suffered from an ACL injury? Okay, take a second before you put down your hands. Take a second and look around. Now that's almost all of you. I'd say probably 75% of you. That may seem really surprising. However, if you look at statistics, that's actually not that surprising at all.
So each year in the U.S., there's approximately 100,000 to 250,000 ACL tears, and about half of these require reconstructive surgery. Roughly 70% of these tears occur during non-contact action, so that can be landing from a jump incorrectly or from a cutting and pivoting motion. Some sports that these injuries typically happen in include soccer, basketball, and football.
So a little bit about the anatomy and the injury mechanism behind an ACL. The ACL is located in the knee joint. It orients into the distal femur notch behind. It overlays the lateral femoral condyle, and it inserts into the tibial plateau. Some injury mechanism of what happens during an ACL tear injury. As you can see in this video, it usually happens on an extended knee. By that I mean when he comes down, the subject's torso extends past the knee joint plane. Coming down, the knee then shifts in and creates a valgus movement and often overextends that ACL, causing a tear.
So one of the current monitoring systems that is available today for looking at the knee angle and measurement of the knee is the dorsal-V system. And this is just a sensor that's placed on the front of the shin. It can measure the varus and valgus, which is the movement of the knee left and right, back and forth, the flight time and the speed of collapse when landing from a jump, and the tibial inclination, which is the angle of the shin compared to the ground. The subject performs a couple exercises like bilateral squats, single leg squats, and single leg hops to collect this data. And currently, the main drawback with this system is that it's rather expensive. You can see each kit costs about $2,000 and has a $250 monthly subscription that's required. So this is currently being used mostly in a physical therapy setting and a little bit in professional athletic training.
Another way of monitoring knee angles and knee joint movement is using a motion capture system. Luckily here at LTU, we have our own in our biomechanics lab. We use the motion capture system. These are pictures from our lab, actually, for all the people who don't go to LTU. Using the capture system, you can use video capture to monitor movement using reflective markers and infrared cameras. We also, in our lab, use 2 Kistler force plates and a plug-and-gate software analysis that monitors the movement across using both of those modalities. Some of the outputs of using motion capture system is dynamic angle measurements as well as real-time motion analysis. And again, as accurate as this could be, much of the constrictions come at the expense as well as it being a stationary method. Usually the subject would have to be brought into a facility that is equipped with this capture system in order for monitoring to occur.
So So we came up with a needs statement. We found that there's a need for a wearable device that records the movements of the knee in order to aid in prevention of knee injuries in active individuals. So we looked into brainstorming 3 different options. We looked at a flexible sleeve, a rigid brace, or a camera system, and we wanted to integrate sensors into whatever system we decided. 2 of our main goals were user-friendly interface, so any active individual could use our device, and we wanted to focus on having it be comfortable and non-obtrusive to the person wearing it when they're performing.
So taking those 3 brainstorming ideas that we had, we weighed them against 6 different criteria that we felt important: stability, comfort, accuracy, cost, weight, and material. Outweighing them to one another, we found that the flexible sleeve outweighed the other 2 and would be the best use for this application.
So once we decided on our flexible sleeve, we had to choose what type of sensor we wanted to use in our device. And initially we looked at using either a potentiometer or an accelerometer, which both of those, the sensor rotation would give us an output angle of the knee. We also looked at using a goniometer, which is a strain gauge that would also give us the knee angle as an output. And the main drawback to these 3 sensors was that the only information we would be getting is the individual angle of the knee, and we wouldn't get any of the other important information that we saw in the injury mechanisms for ACL tears. So we decided to go with inertial sensors, which include accelerometers, gyroscopes, and magnetometers. And these sensors can give us 9 degrees of freedom and an absolute orientation output.
So using our rigid sleeve, our flexible sleeve design, as well as the choice of sensor that we used, we came up with joint. Joint is a sensor integrated wearable sleeve used for monitoring knee joint movement, using 2 inertial sensors, both above and below the knee joint, and a microprocessor, as well as some other circuitry. We will be able to hopefully monitor that, the movement that we're desiring to monitor.
So as you mentioned, we're going to have our 2 inertial sensors integrated into the sleeve, one above and one below the knee. And these inertial sensors are going to give us real-time orientation data of the femur and the tibia, and they're also going to give us relative angle of the knee joint. The accelerometers that are in these inertial sensors are going to have a defined threshold value that will monitor and detect the ground reaction forces in the plant and cut motions, the landing from jumping, and the running and walking motions. And all this information is going to be collected using the Arduino microprocessor, which will transmit this data through a Bluetooth module to the analysis software.
Okay, so as you can see here, we have both sagittal plane and frontal plane anatomy of the knee joint. Here is a safe landing, and we have a risky landing. And as you can see, as I explained in the injury mechanism, in the risky landings, you have the trunk of the subject overextending that knee plane. And when that happens, your femoral inclination and your tibial inclination create a risky knee joint angle, which can cause overextension or overflexion and tearing of that ACL. So with that information, integrating that information into our wearable, how it's going to work with our sensors is the accelerometer will detect a vertical ground reaction force continuously. There will be a preset threshold, and when that is exceeded, it will start the monitoring of both the hip flexion angle and the knee flexion angle. With those also having threshold values, if those are exceeded, it will then flag those movements as risky and send a yellow flag alert to the monitoring software. The real-time data that is not needed to be seen by the user at all times will then be streamed from the device to the monitoring software for storage and data collection for further use.
So our future work, right now, we're working on integrating the circuitry into our mechanical design, as well as working on coding a program to have these sensors communicating with each other. We want to be able to test the accuracy of our device, and to do this, we're going to use initially a goniometer just to test the angle measurement accuracy, and then we're going to use the Vicon camera system to record movements while someone is wearing our device, and then we can compare the measurements from that to the Vicon system's measurements. We also want to be able to test using real-world situations with athletes, and with that, we're going to look into talking to athletic trainers and physical therapists to see what their perceived usefulness for our device is also.
And here's just a quick snapshot of our timeline of what we have accomplished so far up till today, and what we will continue with next semester. As of today, where we've started our prototype building with the integration of the sensor, using the sensor to find its orientation, and starting to write the code for that sensor to output those values that we do need. Going forward with next semester, we have finishing up the prototype and then going through with our testing, through our staged testing, and then our final. Questions?
So I saw like that you weren't doing volunteers. Are you just gonna get like random people, or are you gonna like target anyone?
So yeah, so we have an IRB that's gonna be going on so that we have validation to do subject testing. And then we were gonna focus on athletes. We've actually had a couple classmates who said they would be willing to volunteer, just for the usefulness of it. For the application with actual patients of ACL rehabilitation, I have a friend who we used in our expert interview for some of this information that we're going to be contacting him about to see if he could just use it as a on some of his patients, just as a benchmarking for us to know if it's actually valid. Yes.
How are you going to test the threshold for injury on a patient? That's kind of risky, right?
Sure. So there are. So there are values that, through research and through monitoring over ACL rehabilitation, that there are threshold values. The validation through patients is going to be just to see if it's useful to like a physical therapist, if the output information is useful to them. If not, then the target might change of where we try to target this towards a training module to prevent an ACL. In more the athletic side. However, yeah, we wouldn't want to put any patient that suffered from an ACL injury at risk by just trying to test it on them to see if it overextended.
Could you test it on like a skeletal model?
Sure. I mean, yeah, we could definitely test it on skeletal, and we will do that with the Vicon system, where we'll be using subjects to get that. But for a rehabilitation thresholds, there's a lot of information out there of what kind of force, ground reaction force, can cause that ACL tear, to have that threshold value. So I don't know if that's a question. Yes.
The end goal of this project is a device.
Correct.
Who is the main target customer? Who are you intending for this device to serve? Who are you giving it to? Once it's created, once it's fabricated, once it's even manufactured, who gets it and why do they want it?
So I think our main goal is, we showed a couple monitoring systems that could be used large scale in a clinical setting and in a research setting, and we're more targeting anybody who is an active individual who might want to prevent a knee injury in their movements.
And too, with that being said, like as you saw with the Dorset V, it's really useful, but it's also extremely expensive. So only someone with a high income cap can usually have it, which is usually research facilities, schools. The physical therapist friend that I have actually has one, but they're $2,000 and $300 a month to use it. So the goal is to have this be available to a wider population at a cheaper price, so that can be used in preventative and training and also monitoring. Like the scope itself is large just by getting it out of the market, because a lot of the sensory components are not that expensive. It's a matter of the code that's in.
And would you market it as such to try to
an everyday wearable? Because if our main goal is to make it non-obtrusive to movement, then there wouldn't be a reason why it shouldn't be like a Fitbit. It's that is something that everybody wears. Granted, you wouldn't get as high of a market cap, but you would still have a lot of active individuals, especially on the field and in athletics, collegiate, pro sports, that could wear this under their equipment and it wouldn't be restricted to their knee.
Do you intend to do all the processing like at a base station, or could the device that's actually on your knee, for instance, give you like a vibrator to give you some feedback that you just approach a bad movement?
So that's interesting. So the initial thought was to have it flagged to an off-site monitoring system via the Bluetooth. However, that is interesting to have it. That way the user itself would know and they wouldn't have to constantly be looking at something. That's something that we would definitely consider because I hadn't considered that yet. But that's interesting.
Any other questions? All right, good job, guys. Okay, you guys ready to go?
Yep.
Go for it.
Hello, this is Marissa. My name's Matt, and our project is to design an auto-injector for large volume injections.
So how many of you know someone or use an EpiPen? So EpiPens are a common type of auto-injector. So auto-injectors are automated devices which inject a needle and a drug into a patient. So they're designed for patients to use at home or in emergency situations when a physician is not present. So they are used to treat allergic reactions, and they're also used, So they're used in emergency treatment for allergic reactions, and they're also used to treat chronic conditions. So auto-injectors make the injection process easier for patients. So most commonly, auto-injectors are used for the emergency treatment of anaphylaxis or severe allergic reactions, and
So auto-injectors are most commonly used to deliver epinephrine for emergency treatment of anaphylaxis or severe allergic reactions. This is an example of an EpiPen. They're auto-injectors. They used to just inject an antidote for poisons or for opioid overdoses. Although non-auto-injectors are primarily used in emergencies, they are also used for routine treatment of chronic conditions such as heart disease, high cholesterol, arthritis, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, and other autoimmune conditions. The main problem with using auto-injectors for routine treatment is that current devices are designed with the same way as emergency devices. When someone has a severe allergic reaction, they need the injection of epinephrine to be fast, and the pain of the injection is not a major concern. When patients need regular injections every week or every month to treat a chronic condition, the pain is more of an issue. The current devices look like big pens. They all have some sort of safety cap or mechanism to prevent the patient from to protect the patient from the needle. To inject themselves, the patient pushes the injector against their outer thigh or abdomen at a 90-degree angle. The patient has to press the injector hard enough to depress their skin for the injection to be possible. So when the patient presses the button, the needle is inserted and the drug is delivered automatically. The injection usually takes about 10 to 15 seconds, so it's a very short injection, but it's also very painful. Another issue is that the biologics and long-acting drugs must be injected in large volumes. A large amount of force is required to inject a bigger volume into muscle tissue. When the larger volume of fluid is injected, it causes the muscle compartments to swell, resulting in greater initial pain and lingering soreness at the injection site. 2 milliliters of fluid might not sound like a lot, but immunization shots only about half a milliliter. And all of you have probably had flu shots or immunizations. So imagine using an auto-injector. It feels like you're getting 4 flu shots in the same spot in only 10 or 15 seconds. It's not comfortable. So the overall goal of our project is to design a reliable auto-injector which reduces the pain of high-volume intramuscular injections for adults. We want to minimize the pain the patient experiences, simplify the injection process, and create a device which costs no more than current devices. For part of the background research in our project, we disassembled multiple different injection pens and mechanical devices. One of the things we learned is that what we assumed to be a relatively simple device was actually a lot more complicated. We identified 3 main functions. First, the needle must be inserted with enough force to penetrate the skin at the correct depth. Second, the drug must be dispensed completely with a constant force. And third, the auto-injector must also have at least one safety mechanism to prevent patients from accidentally injuring themselves with the needle. For the injector type, we considered using a wearable device similar to insulin pumps and using single-use designs. Some of the ideas for the drug delivery component of the design we use using a linear spring, a rotary spring, or an electric motor. On the safety side, low-force safety mechanisms are commonly used, but simpler options that we considered were safety cases and caps, which can be easily removed before injection. We also considered using a 2-part system, which would require the patient to perform 2 steps simultaneously to start the injection. After brainstorming, we ranked all of our ideas from the 3 categories into a combination matrix and determine the best combination. The criteria we used to rank our designs were reliability, complexity, aesthetics, durability, environmental impact, and cost. For the needle insertion, using a linear spring was the best option. For the drug delivery component, we decided to use a rotary spring to reduce the downward force of the injection. To protect patients from the needle, the safety cap is the simplest and most effective strategy. We are moving away from the pen-shaped devices towards something resembling the shape of a hockey puck.
So we started prototyping at 3 times the target device design. So scaling up our design helped us to understand the functionality and improve the final mechanism. So these pictures show the evolution of our scaled up model. So the main component of our design is the constant force spring, which is secured under this rotor piece. The rotor has threads which interface with this gold piece, the plunger, which dispenses the drug. So when I wind up the rotor, the plunger begins to move up because the spring has tension. When I release the spring, the rotor begins to spin downwards, causing the plunger to move down, dispensing the drug out of a chamber. So these images give an overview of what our final auto-injector will look like. The patient will press a button on the exterior of the device, and the needle will be inserted. The rotor will be allowed to spin, causing the drug to be pushed out of a chamber through the needle and into the patient's muscle tissue. So the majority of our materials are 3D printed, and we'll also be using metal springs as the major components of our design. So to connect our drug delivery design with the needle injection, we conducted an experiment to show the relationship between the force required to inject the drug and the needle size. So we used ways to create a constant downward force applied to a standard syringe. Then we loaded the syringe with 2 milliliters of water and waited to see how long it would take to dispense. So we saw that the greater the the greater the force of injection and the greater the needle size, the faster the injection would be. So if we keep the needle size constant, the time of injection is solely a function of the force or the strength of the spring. So this is an advantage of our design because we can tailor the injection time based on the strength of the spring we choose. So research has shown that increasing the injection time decreases the perceived patient pain. So the main difference between our device and current devices is that we will tailor the injection time to minimize patient pain while maintaining patient compliance.
This semester, we completed background research and created a scaled-up version of our design to prove our idea could work. Moving forward, we need to scale down our design and create a functional prototype. After that, we will perform mechanical testing to show our device works as desired. We will also assess the usability of the auto-injector designed based on participant surveys. Based on the results of that testing, we will continue to optimize our design. This is our timeline for the overall project. The blue items are things we have already completed this semester, and the orange are things we plan to do next semester. We would like to acknowledge the Lawrence Tech Biomedical Engineering Department, Daniel, Aaron, Vidit, and Dr. Schneider for helping us with our project. Any questions?
How much do you think one of these devices is going to cost in the market?
The current devices cost less than $1. We don't expect our final product to cost much more than that. Now, the drugs that these things are dispensing cost about $10,000 a year. So they're expensive. So the auto-injector is not the big part of the cost.
So the main focus is the reliability because you don't want to lose your drug, which is the major cost. So if the device costs a little more to make it reliable, then it's worth it.
Any other questions?
Are you guys submitting an IRB, or have you already submitted?
Yes, we are currently writing that and in the process of getting that approved.
We submitted it, so we're waiting for approval, yes.
But would you actually have a needle for
So-
testing? Like, will you be actually injecting your subjects?
Not the subjects themselves. From the side of the subject, we're focusing more on that it's comfortable and easy to use. But they'll actually be injecting a ballistic gel facsimile to make sure that it works in actually injecting.
Like a pig shoulder.
We have considered using biological tissues, but we haven't gotten that far yet, so we haven't decided for certain.
I have a peanut allergy myself. Where do you see the portability or the future for the portability of this product? How do you propose an individual carry it on a daily basis when maybe somebody like myself as a male who doesn't carry a purse or something of that nature? How do you foresee somebody to carry it?
Our focus is more about using it on a monthly basis, not on a daily basis. So it's not something that's supposed to be carried with you. It's something that's supposed to be delivered to your home preloaded with the drug that you administer to yourself. This is more for chronic, non-emergency conditions.
Okay.
This is for long-term treatment, not for emergency treatment for things like anaphylaxis.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I was going to ask, have you considered any extra additions to trying to make something more comfortable? Have you considered maybe surveying people who use these things on like something that they wanted to feel, like maybe something that's more cushioned or, I'm just throwing stuff out there. Like surveying them for like what could make it more comfortable for them.
Yeah.
So in the future with our patient testing, we want to ask them like how comfortable is the device to use? You know, is it easy to use? Is it easy to hold? Because the current devices, you have to push against your skin. You have to depress your skin so hard. This device is already in use, so you can't see it. But you have to push this yellow piece all the way up back into the device and hold it very hard against your skin. And all the pressure is sort of aligned in the right way. So our design, it's more spread out. They should be able to get that 90-degree angle a little easier. We'd have to survey patients and participants to see.
Any other questions?
I think one of the points for the injector is the depth of insertion. How are you going to monitor, like, like the average for depth? How are you going to consider your device compared to an auto injector when the auto injector is meant for, the reason why they're pressing so hard is to push the tissue down to lower that distance. How are you going to incorporate that with your device if it's fixed as like a bracket? How are you going to push down? If you push down, it won't condense the tissue when you inject.
guess I'm not sure I understand your question.
So like yours has like a base.
Mm-hmm.
So if you push down at the base, the center of the tissue actually be thicker than the sides. You understand what I'm saying? Like
Yes.
If you push down,
Mhm.
how are you going to compensate for that? Are you going to increase the depth or increase the force for the, you know what I'm saying?
I didn't think of that, but the easiest solution would just be to increase the length of the needle so that it goes further. And the way we could measure that or test it would be with our ballistics gel testing. So it's, measure how far does it go? Does it always inject at the correct depth to make sure that, it's going into the right part of the tissue? That's a good consideration, though. Thanks.
Maybe just a question to help educate myself. What are some of the other types of auto injectors that are used not primarily for an emergency situation?
See, that's the thing. All of them use the same design as the emergency situation, so they're pretty much all pen-shaped. So there's very little variation.
Here's some examples.
But all these are shaped like a pen, all of them. Even though they're not always for emergency situations. So this is kind of the thing we want to address, to get a different kind of design working, so that it's not just for emergency designs, and so that it can be used for more long-term solutions.
Because maybe you could tell us, like, for EpiPen, you want the delivery of the drug to be fast. So, I don't know if you've used yours and how much it hurts, but I think, like, the speed is way more important in an emergency situation versus for chronic conditions, it's more about patient comfort. They have to use this over and over again regularly.
Any other questions?
What is the difference? You know how like people that are diabetic, how they have the insulin inside like the little packets that you guys had on one of your slides. What's the why? How come theirs doesn't have suppressant? Is that skin? Is that like less painful, or could you design that to deliver a chronic?
Are you talking about like a wearable device?
Yeah,
they stick on?
Yeah, like the ones that stick on like for diabetics, and whenever they need the insulin, it gives them like a little shot.
So we considered that, but the thing about these drugs is they don't necessarily need to be delivered over a long time. It's
Right.
not super necessary. So we could make it a wearable, but that would complicate the design. So you probably want to have some sort of electric mechanism, kind of like those insulin pumps. Makes it a lot more expensive. With insulin, it's more of a, you have to deliver it regularly, constantly.
I'm just saying how their needle has to be pretty small. So I'm saying maybe it's something along the lines of that's probably not very painful for them. So maybe like a smaller needle that delivers it at a slower rate, that's longer, that has to go in for you guys to work better.
That's something we've considered as well, but again, this is something that they're not taking constantly. This is just an injection that's supposed to be done once every few weeks, every month or so. So we didn't really want to design something that they would have to wear for only 2 or 3 hours to inject a drug much more slowly.
I understand that you don't have to press into your skin as hard with your device, but if the drug still has to be administered deep into the muscle and it's still more than we're used to and it's still painful, is there a way that you can help with that? Not only just so it's easier to get that 90-degree angle, but also so you can spread out that 2 milliliters of fluid better?
Just do it slower.
The research has shown that doing it slower gives the tissue basically time to respond and results in less pain after the fact, less soreness.
All right, I think that's all the time we have. We'll move on to our next. Okay, so for the next group, we actually had one student who is in athletics here, and they had a game rescheduled and moved to right now. So we pre-recorded the audio portion of this. Maybe you guys will still introduce yourselves while I get the audio queued up.
Yeah, so like you said, you're going to be listening to the audio of our presentation, but we're going to go through the slides up here and kind of point out what you're hearing, and then we also will pass around a prototype that we've made as we get there, and then at the end you can still ask us questions. It'll be similar to the other ones.
about our senior project today. We have an artificial urinary sphincter. I'm Monica, and we have Jocelyn and Nicole here. So about 75 to 80% of Americans suffering from urinary incontinence are females, yet we don't have effective treatments for women yet. So to put that into perspective, we have about 15 million American women that suffer from urinary incontinence. So today we're going to tell you about a specific type of urinary incontinence called stress urinary incontinence, and we're going to tell you about the current solutions and why they're ineffective, and that will lead us into the scope of our project, some of the brainstorming that we did, and the future of our project. So stress urinary incontinence is the involuntary release of urine due to pressure on the bladder. So this can be from any physical stressor, such as coughing and sneezing. In some severe cases, it can even be just from walking. And this is due to the weakened pelvic floor muscles, because there are muscles surrounding your bladder and urethra that hold everything tight, and when those are weakened, urine is able to leak out. Some of the causes in females is pregnancy, childbirth, menopause, and just simply aging. So to better understand where stress urinary incontinence occurs, it's important to understand the key female anatomy. So number 6 is the urethra, and this is the muscular tube that the urine exits from the body. This big balloon is the bladder, and in your urethra you have 2 sphincters, an internal and an external. Your internal urinary sphincter is involuntary, which means it's controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So as your bladder is completely filled up, this involuntary sphincter will open, but you have an external sphincter that is voluntarily controlled, and that's what holds the urine in. So the female urethra itself is very small. It's only 3 to 4 centimeters long and about 6 millimeters in diameter, undilated. And where is it located? It's found on top of the vaginal cavity. And the reason that stress urinary incontinence specifically happens is because after trauma to the muscles, the urethra is able to freely move, which as the bladder neck is unsupported, the urine will then leak out.
So we mentioned beforehand that there are working solutions for men, but not for women, which is a concern since women make up the majority of SUI cases. There are a lot of options for women out there, depending on the severity of the SUI, but they're not that great. So current solutions are characterized as non-surgical solutions and surgical solutions. One of the first-line treatments are Kegel exercises, which involve clenching and unclenching of the pelvic floor muscles for a short period of time. The main issue with this treatment is locating the appropriate muscles and squeezing them, given that the method for locating these muscles is a bit uncomfortable for the patients. Another option is to use a pessary device, which is just a silicone device that is inserted into the vaginal canal, and it helps support the bladder neck. This is where the SUI usually occurs. However, the main concern with these devices are that they cause irritation of the vaginal wall and can become dislodged if not fitted correctly. They can also cause urinary tract infections when not removed on a daily basis and cleaned. One of the surgical solutions is a method known as transurethral bulking agents. So this method uses an endoscope and a needle to insert allogenic, xenogeneic, or autogeneic, which is just a fancy term for coming from the body or from other sources such as animal or other people, into urethral walls. This is to prevent any unwanted urine from going through the urethra. The main concern with this, however, is that the materials used for this procedure are usually collagen-based, and as you may know, collagen is reabsorbed into the body within a given time. This leads to multiple follow-up procedures, at most that last a couple of years. Sling procedures are also a common surgical procedure to treat SUI. There are 2 types of procedures, teeth procedures and autologous procedures. The common problem with these slings is that they may cause mesh erosions, specifically for the tape slings, and cause injury to another side of the body, specific to autologous slings, which comes from your abdominal muscles. Both of them require follow-up procedures and a long recovery time. So after researching the current treatments, we decided to find a way to address the urethral atrophy and biocompatibility issues of current artificial sphincter cuffs for females with stress urinary incontinence. So when we were designing our artificial urinary sphincter cuff, we came across some constraints that narrowed the scope as to what was feasible with our project. We decided that implantation cannot expose the entire urethral length when implanting, since it is partially attached to the vaginal wall, and detaching it would increase stress urinary incontinence. We would also need the cuff material to be biocompatible as to prevent immune response. We are also limited by the diminutive size of the urethra, 4 centimeters long and 6 millimeters undilated diameter. Knowing some of these constraints, we wanted our cuff to be easily implantable, since it will have to be introduced through the vaginal wall. It also has to be feel as natural as possible to the patient and won't interfere with everyday life. Also, it will have to be able to withstand at least 7 cycles per day, given that the bladder has to be emptied around an average of 7 times a day.
With these objectives and constraints in mind, we have designed a tube-like cuff to coil around the outside of the urethra. This design was most favorable when evaluated against our criteria, mainly because its coiled shape is designed to spread out the constriction forces across the entire length of the urethra. This will decrease patient pressure and atrophy of the urethra and therefore lower the patient's pain. This design is also easily implanted through the vaginal wall because the predetermined curve allows it to be wound into place around the length of the urethra. This design also allowed for many material options such as silicone, polyethylene, or Teflon to be used for fabrication purposes. Overall, this was the simplest design that is most easily adjusted to the changing urethral diameter. Originally, the cuff was designed to be a hollow coil about 35 millimeters in length with a thickness of only 0.5 millimeter. The hollowed area allows for gas or fluid to enter the cuff, expand it, and close the urethra. A lot of current cuff models are actually actuated this way. Unfortunately, the size of the cuff opening prevents this from really being a feasible option. It's hard to achieve a hollow tube with a 1.75 millimeter opening because it's too small for air to properly dry the inside of the cuff during fabrication. As a result, the inside of the cuff is still wet while the outside is dry. This wet interior really prevents the walls from completely solidifying, and this eventually will cause structural instability. Because mechanical failure is such a big issue with our current cuff designs, we modified our design to be a solid tube for increased durability and structural integrity. The tube will still be wrapped around the urethra like shown and replace the function of the external sphincter, but by eliminating the thin walls of the hollowed design, the coil can be uniformly fabricated as one whole piece with better strength and durability across the entire cuff. The solid coil will be more compatible with the linear actuation method rather than the gas and fluid movement. In the future, we plan on fabricating our cuff via injection molding, as well as comparing the biocompatibility of a variety of different materials, such as PDMS or different liquid silicone rubbers. We plan on doing this by performing some cell viability assays, as well as comparing the surfaces of each material under the SEM microscope. We also plan on testing the material durability on a pig urinary system. We're planning on performing approximately 1,000 cycles on the pig, which we're going to obtain from a local slaughterhouse. Any questions?
Yes. How like go around?
So since the urethra is on top of the vaginal cavity, right now what they do is they cut open the top of the vaginal wall and they kind of open it up like a book, and then this would wind around it since it's already in this like helical shape, and so then they would wind it around it and then they would sew the vaginal wall back up. So it's pretty invasive. Guys have any other questions? Yeah.
What kind of materials would you use while making them?
Well, as previously mentioned, we were going to use some sort of silicone material. As of now, we have a liquid silicone rubber material that we're going to use. And the reason for that is that we wanted a material that could have a good flexibility so that the cuff could elongate latitudinally instead of horizontally, since we do want the cuff to close the urethra as it elongates longitudinally. But we didn't want the cuff to be so hard that I wouldn't be able to do that. That's kind of the reasoning behind that specific material. But we're also going to try to use other materials such as PDMS, and we're also looking into other forms of liquid silicone rubbers.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there any need to worry about dispersion of pressure since it's going to be a much smaller diameter versus something that's going to cover the entire tube?
Yeah, so ours actually is going to put less pressure. Right now, the cuffs that they use on males, they have a lot of atrophy of the urethra because it's basically a really small ribbon that pinches it closed, and there's so much concentrated force in one area that ours, since it's over the length of the urethra, it should disperse the force better and it should lead to less atrophy. Yes.
Is it actuated at all, or does it just like decrease the threshold?
So we're not really focusing on the actuation method right now, but we have a couple ideas with the linear actuator. But that's kind of going to be if we get to it next semester. Right now we're focusing on the biocompatibility of it.
Yeah, that's mostly going to be for testing purposes when we do it on the pig urethra and pig bladder.
Yes.
The biocompatibility aspect is good, but have you also considered thinking about how, because the FDA likes devices that if you're going to put them into the body, that if there are any problems, that there's a possible infection, that they can be removed relatively easily, and there should be a procedure in place for its removal. Have you thought about how, if there were problems, is it removed after it's been integrated into the body, and how would you deal with possible infections and cleanliness of your model before it gets into the body?
Yeah, so obviously it would have to be very sterile. The problems that we'd have to start looking into would be like if it starts to form like a fibrous encapsulation on there once it's on there. So we definitely would have to start looking at that in vivo testing and stuff. We haven't looked into that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, that's more of the second semester.
Yeah.
But we have
thought about it.
Okay.
Yes.
For ease of application, like for a doctor to install it in an individual, would it be easier if you were to take the coil and then split it in half on a plane and then countersink like a magnetic type device so you don't have to surgically wind it around versus being able to just...
So the reason that, so your urethra, on the one side you'll have the opening and on the other you'll have muscle. So you wouldn't be able to, the reason we want it to wind around is because you don't actually have access to either end of it. So you have to kind of come from the middle and just, all you have access to is like right in the center. So you kind of have to wind it around.
Yeah, and the surgeon is only allowed to make a small incision in order to insert the tube. That's why we wanted
Okay.
to
Yeah, so my mind's picturing this massive surgery.
Yeah, so
you
just
can't
imagine
make it
it's going like around your finger. And so
Okay.
you're feeding it through the urethra and you're going to fit it around.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
Are you aware if anybody's ever actually tried to make a totally artificial urethra? Completely take it out and put it in a new mechanical tube?
I guess we didn't look into that. Like you're saying so that the muscles would then work again?
So yeah, so it's entirely electrical, like control, remote control.
Oh.
Currently, yeah, so right now, actually, with the current cup that we have right now, in females, you have to actually press, I'm sorry, with the current device you have right now, it's like a ribbon that wraps around it, and they actually put the reservoir inside of you, and there's different places to put it, and you have to like press on it to use the bathroom, so like it's either in the abdomen or the labia, and you have to squeeze, and they found that that's just really uncomfortable.
I mean, a relative of mine has something similar for incontinence, and it actually is a remote control.
That's kind of like Bluetooth. You just go to the bathroom, press the button. The ones they have right now for women are like inserted in like the abdomen.
Okay.
Then there's not a lot of space inside where it would be able to be placed if you were to use one of those devices.
So in males right now, the reservoir goes in the scrotum. Women, there's like no room in there. It's all muscle, so it's kind of harder.
So they usually put the pump that you have to squeeze to release the cup into the labia. That's kind of,
Okay, go to the next group then. Good job. Okay, the last two groups that we have are external collaborations with Providence Hospital and medical device startup, I guess, respectively. So, new types of projects for us.
Just make sure it's
like insert Oh, you did too early?
So I'm Leah, this is Lenore, and Steve, and we're working on a portable cautery project with our industry sponsor, Mike Tanner, along with our faculty sponsor, Dr. Lee. So portable cautery devices are used in many different types of surgeries. There's also two types. So you have the portable ones like these, as well as stationary ones that sometimes larger hospitals use, and those get their current and electricity source by plugging in to a large piece of machinery. So we're just focusing on these small battery-powered ones. They're disposable, they're single use. You just basically throw it in the garbage once you're done with a few safety steps. And I'll just show you a quick video of how they're used in surgery.
So we're gonna pass out the current model one.
Alright, well basically you have two different types. There's high temp and low temp ones. And low temperature ones we're not going to pass around because as you can see you can hold the button, nothing really happens. So this is super hot right now. I'm not going to burn anything to show you, but so these are really easy to burn yourself with, so
be careful with that one. It gets up to 2200 degrees, so
this one only gets to about 1700. That one will get red hot when you press the button, so you can play with it, just don't burn anything. So there's a lot of history, obviously, with these starting fires. Like we said, they can get up to about 1500 to 2500 degrees. So if you do the math on these statistics, there's about 420 fires per year that are started by these cautery devices. There's a lot of different sources of fuel in an operating room. So there's a lot of gauze and surgical drapes, as well as the super hot cautery device. And then oxygen masks are another big concern, as well as sterilizing alcohol. So if someone uses an alcohol wipe It's suggested that you wait at least 2 minutes before using one of these devices because, again, you're trying to avoid fires. There is a couple graphic images on the next slide, so if you have a weak stomach, I guess avert your eyes. So the reason why we're focusing on this, fire-related injuries are very serious. So this woman went in for a simple thyroid procedure, and someone was using this portable cautery device. They set it down onto the patient, and it was ignited. It used oxygen from her oxygen mask, and as you can see, it caused very severe burns. And this bottom picture is her 3 years after the original incident. So you can see not really her neck and chest were also burned, but her face is severely disfigured even long after. So we really wanted to focus on preventing these kind of fires. So if you're in best practices right now, you should recognize this hierarchy of controls. So right now, the only controls for reducing these fires are administrative controls. So they give a long list of safety precautions to take. So you're not supposed to turn it on unless you're looking directly at where the tip is pointing. Any gauze should be wet down so that it's less risk of it catching fire. Like I said, the alcohol is going to be given time to evaporate before uses. And then as you're throwing them away, you're supposed to break the end of the tip off, remove the batteries if you can, and then recap it so that no fires start in garbage cans. So we want to kind of create a solution that falls under one of the top 2 levels of control. We want to eliminate any human error. So after doing this research, we came up with our needs statement. So there's currently a need to address the unsafe practice of portable cautery devices that cause injuries and fires during medical procedures as well as after disposal. So we took one of these sample devices that we received from Mike, our sponsor, and we kind of broke it apart to see how the circuitry worked. We were expecting something really complicated and intricate. However, it works kind of like a flashlight. So it's just a simple current that runs through, which heats the end of the device. Low temperature ones use one battery, and where that plastic piece is, if it's a high temperature, they just replace it with the second battery. So you can kind of see, it's hard to tell, there's a small metal strip that attaches here, and it runs along the length, and then the button is inserted right here, and as you press the button, it just connects to this small thumb, which completes the circuit and allows the current to run through, heating the device.
So we had a few expert interviews. Not all of them are listed, but the 2 most important ones are with an optometrist who basically told us that he uses them for 2 main uses. One, which is a clinical use, so if there's like skin tags on a patient or different cysts, he might remove one, use the cautery device, and then a few minutes later need to cauterize another area. Or during operations, which I think is the general use for most of these devices, they're consistently either like always turned on or they hold the button down just because they're touching a lot of different bleeding veins and things like that. So like the time span between uses can vary a lot. And then we also talked with Mike Tanner, who has talked about a lot of different incidences where people didn't dispose of them correctly or didn't follow the proper procedures, which is why we were focusing on tackling the human error aspect of it, just to totally remove that. So based off our expert interviews, we were able to create the objective that we wanted to completely remove the hazard of burning patients and starting fires after disposal. So some of our constraints that we got from our expert interviews was it must not add additional steps or make it harder to use, because the surgeons have been using these for years, and during surgery, oftentimes they're kind of tight on time. So we didn't want to add an additional learning curve to that. And must make it more difficult to activate the device accidentally. So like if you throw it in the garbage, you don't want a piece of trash pushing on that button and turning it on. And then must not restrict the mobility of the surgeon, just because oftentimes they have to be pretty accurate with where they're touching it because it gets really hot. So you don't want to burn them in different areas. So we decided to create a decision matrix. This is actually our second revision of it, but our first idea was a retractable tip, kind of like a pen, except auto-retracting. We also thought of a 2-step button. That way it couldn't just be pressed down easily by an object or something other than a human. and then a non-detachable cover. That way, when they dispose of it, they couldn't just lose the cover or the cap and then dispose of it without that. So some of our criteria that we considered highly, the top you can see like how it's weighted. So the cost, safety, and complexity were all rated higher than the size and reliability. This is because they're disposable. The hospitals don't want to spend too much more money on them. They're already about $10 a piece, so we didn't want to increase the cost that much since it's one-time use. And then obviously the safety and complexity. The safety, that's the main reason we're doing this. We don't want to start fires. So based off all our criteria, we decided the auto-retracting tip was the best choice for us. So we created this design to completely eliminate the cap. As you can see, it's an auto-retracting design. So we have this button that would have the cautery tip implemented in it. And then there would be a spring that goes inside this inner radius here. That way when you push on the button towards this direction, it compresses the spring, and then when you release it, it automatically springs back. And then as far as the circuitry, we wanted to keep it pretty similar to how it was, so we'd have the conductive strip going all the way to the end, and then in the end of the button, there'd be a small piece of metal. That way, once you push it, it would then complete that circuit. And then as far as the fabrication of that, we wanted to 3D print the plastic casing and the button, which you saw on the last screen, and then the rest of the materials that we would kind of use from previous designs would be the springs, the conductive strip, and the battery, as well as the little filament, just because it might be a little difficult to manufacture for us.
So basically, these two graphs shows like when we did the screen electron microscopy on the the main part of the cutlery device, which is conductive strip and the filament, and we figure out like the conductive strip has like mix of copper and zinc, and the filament has aluminum alloy masterate. And so we did this test because we want to know like what exactly the material was used to make of this. So as we are dealing with something with high temperature, so we want to know like how they made it off. So after that, we built our body material table. So basically, as Steve said, like we're gonna make the case and the bottom of 3D printing. So the cost of like the 1 kilogram roll of the PLA material gonna cost like around $30. And we're gonna use like 2 springs, like small one that goes under the battery, and the retracting one. So for the conductive strip, as we did the test, it's gonna be like from base, and it's super cheap. And normal, like AA batteries for the high temp one, we're gonna use 2 and 1 for the low temp one. So to build our model, it's gonna cost roughly like $7. So for future work, we're gonna build a functional prototype and gain professional feedback from people. So when we're gonna reverse and improve functional prototype using testing results, and for our testing, we're gonna compare functionality of current device with the current device, and do surveying with participants, and we're gonna also do more SEM testing for material properties. So this is our timeline, like the top one, what we have done this semester. So we are just done with the simple 3D modeling. So for next semester, we're gonna be more focusing on how to build the real device and test it and see what is our prototype final version. So any questions, guys?
What are you testing it on? Like what's your what kind of testing are you going to do, and what is it going to tell you about how the device is functioning and how it compares to what's currently available?
So first of all, we would like to let surgeons use it to see how it's compared to the previous one. So to see if it's comfortable or not comfortable, and then we're gonna use it. Let someone have a piece of paper, try to bring some color things to test it out. So let someone to.
We were talking about mixing up a bunch of like red and green yarn or something, for example, and then telling some surgeons try to use this and only cut the red yarn in this whole jumbled mess. That way, you can kind of test the precision and make sure that it still have a similar functionality to the current designs.
Which surgeons are you going to take this to?
Just the ones that we talked to in our expert interviews. There's probably 4 or 5 of them that we have made connections with.
From a cost standpoint, how does it compare to what's currently offered, whether that be through the manufacturing process with added parts or complexity with assembly?
So right now, like Steve had said, they cost about $10. And through our materials, we figured it costs about $7. Even if we have to add some stuff, we're assuming most of our cost is going to come just from the internal circuitry. We focus on doing mostly 3D printing to change the design, keeping all the internal parts the same.
Obviously, if we manufactured the entire thing, it'd probably raise a little bit in price just to ensure quality and stuff like that. But we didn't really add many components, pretty much just a spring, so the price shouldn't really increase that much.
Would your design have prevented the accident you showed at the beginning, lady?
Yeah, so what we're focusing on is having a slide button. So the ones that are currently used, all you have to do is push them down in the heat, like you kind of saw. So a lot of times these can start in trash cans just from having weight on top of them. So in her case, it rolled, and because it rolled onto the button, it was able to ignite. It was underneath some surgical drapes, so I'm not sure if it was depressed or if it just had enough weight itself to spark.
So someone wasn't actually using it at the time?
No, they had used it. It had cooled up. They cool in a second or two. So we've tested that out. You can press it, let go, give it a second, and touch it. It doesn't burn you. So a lot of times these are just set down in surgeries, and so that's the case that happened with her. So they've used it, set it down, and that's when we recommend it.
If yours is like a spring-loaded device, if you throw it in a trash can and something catches the switch on it, won't it do the same thing? Won't it turn on the same way as pushing the button back?
I mean, theoretically, yes. So right now, you're technically supposed to dispose of them in sharps containers. So in a sharps container, I don't know if you've seen one, but you basically have to put things in horizontally. So putting things in that direction is going to make it a lot harder. I know we had talked about part of the problem is human error. Someone finishes the surgery and just tosses it in a garbage can. I think having just weight depressing a button is going to be a lot harder than just having a spring be pushed forward. But I mean, that's something that we'll need to do additional testing on as well.
You said that they use the device kind of continuously, right? So couldn't you make it to where if you click the button, it'll go hot for a period of time, and then it'll just turn off and the device won't work? Would you use that as a safety mechanism? That way you don't have to, I mean, you say that people will dispose of it incorrectly. How do you make sure that they don't just throw it away?
So part of that, the reason we couldn't just have a timer or something like that, those were in our initial designs, but after speaking with the expert interviews, basically everyone we brought that idea up to, they said it wouldn't work just because of the large difference in duration of times for the surgery. But I mean, with our device, the same protocols would be in effect. So you're still supposed to remove the batteries, and you're still supposed to take off the tip. It's just to provide one extra thing in case someone forgot to do maybe one or all of them. Hopefully these extra measures would help prevent the fire.
Are you going to patent it?
There is a patent right now, and Mike Tanner said it's good enough, you'll add us to that patent.
So you said you filed a provisional patent, and then whatever we come up with, he's gonna try to work with us and see what we can do with it.
So he has some design. We don't know what it is. He hasn't told us.
Yeah, he didn't want to sway our design process.
Are you gonna try and get a working model with the 3D printed PLA version?
Eventually, yeah.
Okay. Please be careful when you're using PLA.
Any other questions? All right. Good job.
Thank you.
Okay, one more.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I thought that's so cool.
Hi, Sarah. That's at the same
Or some coffee.
Really? I can feel it. Never mind, I can feel it.
I took it so many times. Yeah, same. I started. You guys are car accident? Not this time. But that did happen. Yeah,
Alright, good afternoon.
Everybody quiet down.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah. I'm here along with Kevin and Beth. We are working with Providence Hospital Simulation Lab on their intubation blade. To start off, their simulation lab has medical students go in and practice real-world situations. So in the picture to the right, those are rooms that the medical students go into, and their professors will be in charge of the dummy and talk. The professor would be talking through the dummy and making it so that the students have to work specific things on the dummy, so give it medication, IV, intubate the dummy depending on the situation. And on the left is just a surgical procedure that they're practicing, not on a real life patient. So, question, how many people have had a surgery? This can include wisdom teeth, getting your tonsils removed, so majority of you. So there's 230 million surgeries each year worldwide. And majority of those surgeries, you have to be under general anesthetic, which means that you will be paralyzed, causing it so you can't breathe. So then you would have to be intubated. So 7 out of 10 suffer injuries such as swelling or internal bleeding due to the intubation technique that is provided. So insertion techniques for both the tracheal tube and laryngeal mask are of paramount importance in the prevention of airway trauma and postoperative sore throat. Simply, the way that people intubate you and use the mask can cause problems through the patient, causing sore throat, not being able to talk after the procedure, stuff like that. So for our project, our need statement is addressing quantitatively the excess force applied while using intubation blade in medical procedures during medical practices that result in better techniques and less force when using the intubation blade. We have a short little video on how to intubate.
So you can see they gently insert the blade, careful not to touch the teeth because they'll break. And then they look
for the little yellow spot, and that's when the trachea is open and they can then insert the tube. The tissue there is very sensitive, and there's a vagus nerve there as well that they want to be careful to miss during this intubation to not cause the sore throat. Our purpose is, in this ongoing study, FlexiForce sensors are used to measure the amount of force obtained when using an ablation blade to, 1, allow better technique to occur with less force being applied, and 2, allow medical staff to have quantitative data to use while practicing the intubation technique. We found in our pre-research that there wasn't any quantitative data. There's some qualitative data, but nothing showing the pressures that are currently being used, what's a safe amount of pressure to use, and what's excessive and is going to hurt the patient. So our partners at Providence, Dr. Creature, was at a conference and saw a qualitative study using Fuji paper that talked about this technique and the injury that can occur. So we decided to start our study with using Fuji paper similar to them and seeing the different pressures that could be applied. So we had 2 groups, an experienced group and a novice. We defined experienced as professionals that have done 10 or more intubations on live patients, and novice as people that had less than that. We found a trend that the novice users had more pressure at the end of the blade, especially near the tip, and the experienced users distributed the force more over the whole area. And you can see that on our 3D printed blade, just a mock of one of the tests we did.
So to begin our design matrix and how we are going to proceed on to making the force sensors, our first idea was to 3D print a blade, as you can see is passing around, and integrate sensors within. So there's holes for an LED light to go through the blade. As well, we would integrate the wiring for the sensors to go through the blade.
The second option was to modify an existing blade. We decided against that due to the difficulty of fabrication and a lot of safety concerns, especially if we're fabricating an already existing metal, it can have sharp edges, and then the exposed sensors and wiring is also an issue.
Our third idea was attaching an attachment for the current blade that allows sensing. We thought some type of sleeve that would go over the end of the blade, and we decided that the usability of this with the different sizes and types of blades would not work.
So there's 2 different types of intubation blades in multiple different sizes. You see the different sizes on the left here. The 2 different types are curved models, which we decided to use due to their popularity. The other model is a straight blade model. Those are becoming a little out of style due to the excess pressure that they put on the vagus nerve that Beth mentioned earlier. So you see our first prototype here is printed in yellow. It was pretty big and printed in 2 pieces, which is why you see that plastic welding strip in the middle there. And throughout testing, we discovered that it was way too big and the tip was really flimsy. So with our new model in the blue there, it was a much sleeker, more compact design. There's no longer that exposed tip there. And the handle's a little bit smaller too, so it's easier for them to handle. A lot of times they grip it in different ways, so if the handle's too long, it'll bump with their wrist and have a lot of other issues. So the way this actually works is we're using these FlexiForce sensors. Now these act as a piezo-resistive component when you put them in a circuit, and all that means is that it changes when you put pressure on it. So initially there's a very high input resistance in these sensors, and then when you press down on them, it lowers this resistance. This change in resistance can then be measured as a change in voltage, which through our calibration can be measured as a change in force. All of this is wired together with the Arduino so we can measure it on the computer. So here's our actual setup. You see we have 2 different sensors, and they are set up in a voltage divider formula. So for you BME kids that haven't taken instrumentation yet, this will be seared into your brain within this maybe a month. So these sensors, they act as R1 in this formula. So when there's no pressure on them, theoretically they're infinite, which means their volt outages is 0. As you press down, the resistance lowers, and it gets closer to the voltage in value, which in our case is 5. Once again, we calibrated this, and we can measure that as a change in force now. And so the last step we have here is everything's hooked up to this op amp in the middle. And with the Arduino board, there is only one analog to digital converter on board. And what happens is when we have such a high resistance, we're working in the scales of tens to hundreds of mega ohms, it was flooding this Arduino board, and when we had multiple sensors, we were getting a lot of noise and a lot of excess data that wasn't making sense. So this op amp is set up as a voltage follower or a buffer amp, if you guys are familiar with instrumentation. And all it does, it doesn't change the values, it just lowers the resistance. So now we can set in multiple sensors into the Arduino board. So Beth is going to do a live demonstration that hopefully works well. So I put this up. Here's the forces that we're measuring in the Arduino. This is real time. So as she is, oh man. All right, so now she's measuring the Arduino, and this is real time, so as she pushes forward, the results get higher and higher. The difficulty with the setup we have now is we got wires everywhere. This is a finished prototype. So measuring mostly peaks and transitions, so like when she pushes forward, we see a peak. This data is also stored numerically. It can be exported as a CSV file, which is compatible with Excel, and we can make some pretty looking graphs doing that.
If you want to note, right here we're about between 8 and 12 for my top one, and very small on the second one.
What were the units?
Those are newtons.
Within this graph, we were able to quantify data with our expert interview. So the first 3 trials you can see are between 8 and 12 newtons, while the fourth trial was like 2 newtons, so that's what we saw with Beth's live demonstration. So with the small one, this would be down here, and the peak with like 12 would be this one up here by the tip.
So here's our preliminary results from a very small trial. We only had a few people here, and we really hope to expand this. But in general, we noticed that people that aren't as experienced have a lot higher force that they're pushing on it, and this is to compensate for the lack of technique, so they're really just trying to brute force it open rather than sweeping the tongue and putting it more delicately. So our future work is we want to integrate the sensors into the actual blade, so there's not wires everywhere. It's a lot safer and a lot more convenient for the user, because we are really focused on repeatability. We want the user to grab the blade, push it open, and not think about the device, not think about wires hanging over there, and getting nice clean results.
So in the next year, we'll be having a bigger study done with people from Providence, including anesthesiologists, paramedics, nurses, and honestly anyone with medical experience to get more data. We'll also be adding an LED light into our 3D model that's being passed around.
The IRB trial is going to help us define our thresholds. We have an idea based on our preliminary data, but we need to define what's appropriate threshold and what's excessive, so the simulation later can signal red for bad technique and green for good technique.
So any questions for us? Yeah, Jack.
Patent. Are you patenting this?
There's talks about it, but Arduino is open source. The FlexiForces are patent. So there's not a whole lot of wiggle room, but Joe has talked about if we can make this
But the
proprietary.
device is. The device that can sense this and then be used for training.
Yep. Right now we're still in the prototyping stage. We have to really finish it up before we can think about filing anything realistically.
I might not be understanding it the best, but have you considered putting a sensor in the handle, like with a spring?
So we're focused on like the force in the throat, because it's due to you get a lot of swelling, and when you wake up from surgery, people complain about sore throat, they can't talk right. So we're more worried about damaging that rather than the handle. The handle's actually pretty easy to tell if you're putting too much force and bad technique, because you actually break the top teeth of the patient.
On top of it, an experienced user is going to use no more than 3 fingers holding the blade, and an unexperienced user is going to use their whole hand and almost 2 hands to be doing it because they think they need to put all that force on it.
I might not be understanding what's the main difference between your guys and what's out there?
This is a simulation. So right now the only simulations they do is you go up to this dummy and you try to do it, or a virtual reality simulation where you can't look at your body position as much. It's more about the angle you're inserting the blade in those augmented reality systems.
Essentially somebody's looking over your shoulder and saying, yeah, that's okay, rather than there being hard numbers to associate with it.
With this, you can tell when you're doing proper technique, so you can see the blade angle and how you're holding that, as well as your body angle, since you're doing it on that, and it's displaying your data too.
So it's geared more as a training
Correct.
tool?
Simulation.
Have you considered adding a type of vibration in the handle so that way when they reach that threshold for pain, you might be able to associate that with it vibrates the handle? They used to have torque wrenches in the automotive industry that would vibrate when you get to a certain torque. Might be something to consider.
Yeah, that's certainly an option. A lot of this is focused right now on defining the threshold. There is no data that we could find or Dr. Krucha could find to associate with intubation.
Well, throughout the test, can we find what?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Once we have that larger scale, we submitted our IRB to Providence Hospital already, so we're thinking January is where we're going to be doing that large scale trial.
Any other questions? Yes.
Are there like analogous training devices that would be similar, like not for intubation, but for like other medical? I don't know if you've gone to Providence a lot, so I don't know if they have anything.
At Providence, it was all you look over the shoulder and the professor or the teacher like shows if you're doing it good or not. It's like with ours, we want the data to calculate, and at Providence, there was no data.
He also talked about at the simulation conferences he goes to, even the people presenting, they don't show a lot of data with this. It's more observation only, so adding the quantitative side's kind of a more engineering approach to this training.
I was thinking of something like a laryngoscope or something like that, where you're looking at how much force is applied.
They have a training tool there, but it's like, it's just looking at your technique, not forces at all.
Any other questions?
How did you decide where to put the sensors?
The Fuji paper is how we helped assess that based on where we saw the pressures. We saw no pressures being applied at the inside of the blade, and most of the pressure being applied at the tip, and then a little bit proximal to that.
All right, well, I guess that's it. Okay, so for the LTU students that are here, we have food for you. So good job. You made it through first semester. Congratulations, everybody. I'll talk to you more individually as groups up there, but in general, best practices.